Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Clubhouse. Today's guest needs no introduction. She initiated the Scottish School Development Programme for tennis. She does so much up and down the UK as a voice for female empowerment in sport. And she has two pretty familiar sons, Jamie and Andy Murray, as well. It's Judy. Judy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this morning. We should be in the middle of the Wimbledon fortnight at the moment. So how have you managed to replace that time, and are you missing it?
No, I'm not missing it at all. I think we've had such a long lead-in time to knowing that it's not on, and although it will be, I think, the first time in 18 years that I've not been there with the boys. They first played in the junior event in, I think it was 2002, and we haven't missed a year since then. So in that sense, it's a little bit strange. It's a bit weird, but nice watching some of the reruns on TV. So everybody's getting their tennis fix through that, I guess. But yeah, it's who would ever have imagined that this virus was going to floor everything for such a long time? But yeah, it's I won't miss the stress of it. That's for sure. I think the last few years since the boys got up to the top of the game, I've found it very stressful. Enormous amount of pressure and expectation on both of them going into Wimbledon every year, and that has taken the enjoyment out of it for me a lot, unfortunately. But there we go.
Can you enjoy any of it at all? I was going to ask you about that. Do you manage to get time to kind of relax and catch up with probably familiar faces, or is it literally just full stress for the full fortnight, whether you're watching Jamie or Andy?
Yeah, I tend to not go apart from to watch their matches. I don't hang around Wimbledon anymore. I used to, and then I think maybe you just can't get any peace to have a drink with friends, because there's so many people around. Of course, everybody's very excited about the tennis, and lots of people want to speak to you and so forth. So it's actually easier to go up into the village and go out with friends there and stay away from the kind of madness. But yeah, I mean, I love Wimbledon. I love everything about it. The tradition, and it's been part and parcel of my life since I was probably about 10. We're a big sporty family. Parents loved Wimbledon and most other sports as well. So yeah, but yeah, I love the tradition of it, but I have struggled to enjoy it because I think of the pressure on the boys the last few years.
And you mentioned there your sporting background. You grew up in Stirlingshire in Scotland, and I actually read an article recently when you look back on your playing days and you think that you didn't want to lose more than you wanted to win. Can you explain kind of what you meant by that? And that was you kind of put that reason behind the fact that maybe you didn't go on then to play at a professional level, whilst you won so many junior tournaments and did exceptionally well during your age groups, you maybe then didn't go on to the next level.
Yeah, well, I think what to put it into context, when I was a junior was a very, very long time ago, and there was literally no infrastructure for tennis in Scotland. We didn't have in those days any covered courts, so you couldn't play all year round, even if you wanted to. And our weather is pretty shocking in Scotland, so you'd play tennis in the summer and you'd play something else in the winter. I played badminton. But we had no world class players, no world class coaches, so there was never any real aspiration from anybody, I think, to be a world class player or a world class coach, because it just wasn't something that Scotland did or could do back then. And I got to quite a good level as a junior. Against that backdrop, there was, coaching wasn't a thing back then. You learned to play the game first with my parents, and then with the older members at the club, firstly the older juniors, and then obviously when you get good enough you can play with the adults, and they teach you how to play the game. Nowadays coaching is such a thing that everybody's programmed into activity from a young age, and there's less playing of the game and much more structured coaching, which is absolutely the wrong way round. So yeah, when I got up to the number 8 junior in Britain, which, as I said, probably was not bad given the background. And when I tried to take a year out to play tennis in between leaving school and going to university, I really had to go on my own. And back then, when I was almost 17, the world was such a different place. And there were no mobile phones, there were no ATM machines, there was no laptops and internet. and you literally were disconnected from everything. So you'd get on a train, a bus, a flight, and there were hardly any flights in those days as well. I mean, that was an absolute luxury, if even if you could find one, or if you had the money for it. So it was very much about, going abroad and trying to coach yourself and trying to look after yourself and trying to manage yourself in terms of entering events, getting to them, feeding yourself. And I didn't last very long. I got my bag robbed on a bus in Barcelona, and when my wallet went with my money and passport and tickets and everything in it, was really when I'm on my own in a country I don't speak the language, and I'm trying to work out, what do I do now? How do I get home? Police, embassy, trying to make yourself understood. And basically, when I eventually got hold of my father, he said, "You are coming home. This is too dangerous." Because my dad ran his own business, my mum was looking after my two brothers. There's no chance of anybody coming with me. Wouldn't have been able to afford to do that anyway. So I do think that much of my experiences as a young player have formed what I have become, which is all about creating opportunities for the kids in Scotland to be able to follow their dreams, to make sure there's an infrastructure and support there, that if they're good enough, that they have the opportunity.
And that is something that you now dedicate your life to, essentially. I saw you actually tweet the other day over, it was a video of a Nigerian child actually dancing near where they lived, and you captioned over the top of it saying, "Talent is everywhere, opportunity is not." And that is now something that you, as I say, dedicate your life to. Where did that desire come from? As you mentioned there, the incident in Barcelona, but where did that sort of, within you, where did that desire initially come from?
I think is always, we are all products of our environment, and my sporting environment was very much around community clubs in the small town where we lived, and being involved as a family. So I have a big sense of community spirit. I really rail against unfairness in anything, and like you say, a lot of what I do now, since I stepped away from the top end of the game when I stopped being the Fed Cup captain in 2016, I made a conscious decision to step away from the top end of the game, or the performance end of the game, you might call it, and go back into grassroots, because I figured that I could have a much longer term effect on the growth of tennis in Scotland. And actually on women's tennis in the UK, I work on a big programme with the LTA that tries to build a bigger female workforce, encourage more women to get involved in delivering, because we're very, very outnumbered in terms of male coaches to female coaches, and I think we need to redress that balance in order to keep more girls in the game, because women who were once girls understand better how to create environments in which girls can thrive. We lose a lot of girls from sport in the teenage years, when so much is changing with their lives, their bodies, emotions, and so forth, and women understand that. So I think that's one of the reasons I feel like we need more women around. But yeah, what I did, back in 2016, was I created a program called Tennis on the Road, and it was basically a van full of equipment and myself and another coach called Chris Suter. We drove around Scotland, taking tennis into rural and deprived areas. Into areas where you wouldn't normally find tennis. So you often wouldn't find courts. You certainly wouldn't find coaches if you don't find courts. And you usually wouldn't find money to be able to pay for it. So we taught people within the local community how to deliver starter tennis coaching in whatever space they had, and starter tennis competitions. So we have, barrier tapes across 2 chairs in the playgrounds, the village halls, because of course you can learn the skills to be able to play tennis really in quite small spaces, if somebody shows you how to. And that's been a huge thing for me. And 2.5 years ago, I turned Tennis on the Road program into my own foundation, which was very imaginatively called the Judy Murray Foundation. And what we did with the foundation was we tackled a number of project areas, so that we don't just go in for a one-off hit and deliver a training course or a clinic or something like that. We go in for 3 years, and we build a network in the area. So we work with the clubs, if there are any, all of the schools, primary and secondary. We train all the teachers to deliver tennis in the schools. We bring all the youth organisations, like-minded charities, football clubs. Depends what's there, and we really address the needs of that area with the other people in the community, because at the end of our 3 years, we want to leave it in very safe hands, that there is a huge number of people in the community who know how to deliver, how to organise, how to network, and to make the sport sustainable in these areas. Because when you go into new to tennis areas, you've got to sell yourself and you've got to sell your sport. And you have to keep going back to the long haul to build relationships, because it's any long-term thing is all about people. It's not about, a marketing campaign or a one-off hit. A one-off hit will have a short-term effect, but it will never have a lasting effect. So we go in, we get our hands dirty, we absolutely love it. There's some incredible stories that come out of it in terms of empowerment of local people, giving them chances not just to play, but to deliver, to be part of something, sense of belonging. It's we've got some great case studies of people's lives that it has changed just by giving them the chance to lead or deliver or play something within their backyards.
Have you got any examples? You mentioned case studies there. Have you got any examples of real sort of success stories that have come out of Scotland because of the foundation?
Yeah, we've got. I mean, we've got loads, and I think one of my favourite ones is in the East End of Glasgow. The East End of Glasgow is very very deprived area. You won't find a tennis court for love nor money. But in the East End of Glasgow, we had two Davis Cup semi-finals, because Jamie and Andy are Scottish, because Leon Smith, the captain, is Scottish. He was my first apprentice coach when I was the national coach when he was 20. So these two semi-finals and one or two other ties were in Scotland, and they were put in the Emirates Arena, which is not a tennis venue, but they created a tennis court in there because, of course, of the seating for the Davis Cup, and it's in the East End of Glasgow. So all the local people have got nowhere to play tennis, no courts, but there was this massive world event in tennis. And, it really hit me when I was sitting there watching that there was nothing for the local people to play, and that those who were able to come and watch it were able to afford to buy tickets. And the unfairness of it really got to me. So we started a project in the East End a few years ago. So build a workforce first, create the demand, put pressure on the council to build some courts. And we've achieved all of that. We've got 3 courts there now that were derelict. We found the derelict spot. We went to the council again and again and again. Eventually, we got them resurfaced with tarmac. So they're football as well as 3 tennis courts and some mini courts. And they back to back on a secondary school and a primary school. So they're busy during the day with the school kids and the local community. But anyway, the workforce is the important thing, because the facilities on their own won't get the job done. You need people to deliver activity. So we started to build a workforce. We now have, I think, 17 level 1 qualified tennis coaches in the East End of Glasgow. And one of the young people who was put forward to us when we started it, he was 16. He had a lot of behavioural problems. Father was in jail for murder. Mother had mental health issues and couldn't or didn't parent him. But he loved sport. He was in danger of dropping out of school because he just literally wasn't interested, but he loved sport. And we were asked if we would take him into our workforce development programme. And so we did. And he is now 19. He is a level 2 qualified tennis coach. He delivers some other sports as well. He has a full-time job. He started assistant, then part-time, then now has a full-time job. He has so his job allows him to have a tracksuit that has coach on the back of it. He has empowerment, he has status within the community, he has confidence, self-esteem, he has, of course, skills to lead, present, deliver, and so forth in his backyard. And the change for him, who was going nowhere and may well have ended up in a really bad position because there wasn't anyone to put an arm around him and give him an opportunity. So that's one of my favourite stories, because it fits into everything that we tried to create in the East End. And the East End is our first project. So there we go. It's a success story.
And that story alone will make it worthwhile for you, I'm sure. But I suspect there's many more stories like that. But I read in a recent interview, you didn't necessarily always. I mean, the Murray family were thrust into the spotlight when Jamie and Andy started competing at the likes of Wimbledon. But you didn't necessarily. You mentioned not necessarily making yourself visible when approached to be involved with things like, well, you noticed that the ITF, I think it was the ITF, was an all-male panel or all-male board. And from a leadership perspective, you then felt as though it was your duty to become more of a visible voice for the female side of the game.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I felt like it was my duty, but I felt like I needed to play my part in it. You know, if you want things to change, you have to step up and you have to speak up. And I think this was back in 2010, and I did 10 years as a Scottish national coach. I left in early 2005 because I couldn't get anybody to give me an increase in funding, neither the LTA nor Sport Scotland, on whom Tennis Scotland relies for its existence. To help the kids that had got to a really good level. We had a lot of very good teenagers, and they needed to train outside the country. We didn't have an environment with no clay courts, no sunshine. You need a variety of sparring partners. They needed to leave the country, and to leave the country to go to train somewhere is very expensive. And I absolutely couldn't get anybody to believe in me or my program or the players that I was working with to make that happen. And I felt awful after 10 years of bringing them up from 7, 8, 9 years old to become world-class junior players, that suddenly I can't help them anymore because I don't have the environment, I don't have the staff, and I don't have the money to be able to create it elsewhere. So I left that role in 2005 incredibly frustrated and disappointed. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Scotland's such a minority sport, but it had a lot to do with the fact that I was a woman. Absolutely no question that I didn't get believed in. So it's hugely satisfying to me that so many of the players, Baltasha, Andy, Jamie Baker, Colin Fleming, went on to achieve great things, represented Great Britain in the Davis Cup and Fed Cup, and that Leon Smith, one of my apprentice coaches, heads up the Davis Cup team and head of men's tennis, and Karen Ross, another one of my coaches, headed up disability tennis in the UK till not so long ago. But anyway, it was my little cottage industry. But to cut a long story short, they wouldn't give me any additional support, and I thought, right, okay, I'm going to go with my kids. I'm going to give them the best shot that I can myself, because they were at an age and stage where kind of 18, 19, where you need to be able to concentrate on the tennis playing part of your game, but somebody needs to manage all the logistics and, you know, the hiring of coaches, the paying of coaches, all of these things that are very difficult to do when you're young. So I had gone from being the national coach to literally being Andy and Jamie's mum. So I was around for them. And in 2010, I was at the US Open, and the ITF announced their latest board, and it was 14 men. There was no women on it. And I read it in the newspaper, because you read newspapers in those days. And I was so incensed with it. I thought, you know, who looks after the female side of the game? The ITF is the global developmental body for tennis, and there's no women on it. So obviously the women's side of the game will be left behind, because there's nobody speaking women's language or seeing things from a female perspective. So I went off and found the guy who was the development director, who was an Irish guy who I'd actually known from my playing days. And I just went off at him about it, and he let me finish. And then he basically said, look, the constitution is such that if of the 206 member nations of the ITF, we can only pick our board from what's put forward by the member nations. And I said, are you saying 206 member nations didn't put forward any women? And he said, hardly any. He said, you know, handful maybe. But he said, we can't change the constitution. Anyway, I was absolutely incensed by that. And he said, look, the problem is that not enough women put themselves forward. And I said, okay. And he said, well, look at you. He said, how many times have I asked you to speak at our ITF Worldwide Conference? And you say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do something like that, you know, too shy, you know, 1,000 people at these things and stand up in front of them and whatever. And I never would have been able to do something like that. And he absolutely turned it on me, and he said, you know, you've got a profile as a coach, as a, you know, figure in the game. And he said, if people like you, who are recognisable women, don't step up, speak up, show up, etc., he said, you're going to get what you've always got. And it really hit me that And I just said, right, okay, I'll do it. I'll do your conference. And I did, 2 months later, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it, and I made myself do it. I wasn't very good at it. I don't think I was anyway. But from that moment, I looked into the audience and I saw among the 1,000 people that were there in Mexico, I had to go 11-hour flight to Mexico to do this damn thing. And, probably somewhere between 10 and 12 times as many men as women, which is normal or usual at these conferences. And when I finished and I was packing my stuff up at the kind of lectern thing, the number of women that came down to speak to me was it was quite overwhelming, and they were all saying the same thing. Thank you so much for being a woman and stepping up and speaking on behalf of women. It wasn't that I spoke. My presentation wasn't all about the women's side of the game. It was about my experiences, and a lot of that was my experiences as a woman working in a man's world. But it really hit me that I really need to do this. I need to do more of this. And I thought, right, I'm going to do 3 a year. And that was how I got started. And I got better and better at doing it. I found my way of doing it, that I use a lot of slides and clips so that I don't forget what I'm saying. I hate listening to people who are reading things off a sheet. I can't stand it. I prefer something that is more conversational. But that was how I got started. And of course, a couple of years later, when I became the Fed Cup captain, I had to speak out a lot in the media and at conferences and things like that on behalf of British women's tennis, our British female players, and women in tennis in general. And it's kind of snowballed from there. And I've got involved in empowerment of women in sport across all sports. But it really has made me believe that if you have a voice, you must use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And following on from that, I actually have a nice question from Grace, Kath, and Katie B. There's concern that there's maybe a drop off in females participating in sport through their teenage years. How do you think that we keep girls involved in sport more and perhaps maintain that level of the spectator level as well? Because I mean, women's sport still to this day is not promoted in the same way as men's sport is either. But how do we put inspirational athletes and female sports stars up in lights in order to maintain that presence for the sports through the girls' teenage years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that I'm asked on a regular basis. So I just give you the way that I see it. I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is the way that I see it. That sport has traditionally been a male-dominated domain, so we're fighting against that. In the last few years, there has been enormous momentum and groundswell around women's sport, best we've ever had. And for me, this has come because of the level of performance of certain athletes and many of the national teams. It's very much easier to get people behind a team. So it's important that the national teams, whether that's GB, whether it's England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, are at a level where people want to go and watch. If they're watchable, they become televisible, if that's a word. They become written about in the media, they become talked about, people want to go and watch them, and therefore they become sponsorable because people will buy tickets. You will get the numbers going to watch if the performance is high. And for many years, team sport performances on the women's side were not good enough to justify particular interest from huge amounts of spectators, and therefore not the media, and therefore not sponsors. So it's all kind of wrapped up in each other. But for me, the key was the investment in the performance of female athletes and female teams. And you only have to look at the England women's team successes, best among the best in the world: football, hockey, netball, cricket, rugby. To understand the groundswell, people like Jess Ennis-Hill, some of the individual athletes that really rise through Olympics and Commonwealth Games in profile because they're on our TV. There are more of them around, but it's like so many things. You get a bit of momentum, you can't be complacent and go, oh, that's great, we've got a bit of momentum. You have to keep your foot on the gas and you have to keep pushing. And it's really disappointing that the virus hit and that momentum has stalled. And we've seen men's sport going back, and we've seen women's sport not going back in the same way, and that's disappointing. And for me, there's so many things but we need more women in decision-making positions within sport. It's always been my belief that every sport should have a female-focused strand to its development strategy, and that strand must be led by a woman who understands our sport and has the passion to drive it. Because if it isn't, we will always be left behind. We'll always be thought of second, because it is perfectly natural that men think of men's sport first, because they are men. They see it with men's eyes, they hear it with men's ears. It is their world. But we need to have more women. For us to get more women into those positions, we need to have career pathways. So we need to have support, not just to bring more women into delivering sport, whether that's coaching, administering, officiating, etc., media. We need a career pathway that helps them to climb that ladder, that gives them all the skills, the tools, and the experiences that they need to be able to operate on behalf of women at the top end of the game. And those are things that I see that are still missing in many sports. They're certainly missing in my sport, in tennis. There is no career pathway for women. There's a qualification pathway that's completely different, but there aren't jobs, there aren't salaried jobs for coaches. You have to be self-employed to be a tennis coach, and I'm sure it's the same in other sports. So therefore, are you attracting the very best talent that you possibly could? No, because people come out of university with student debts and they want something that has a safe structure and a salary. Most sports don't offer that. So we have to do much better with that and creating opportunities. And I think in terms of raising profile, we need, I think, more business women, more female agents, looking after the big picture for female athletes, to help them to work the media, to grow a brand or a profile, to be comfortable doing that, to be confident doing that, to be able to speak to rooms full of potential sponsors or media and so forth. And certainly in my tennis world, the bulk of the agents are men. The bulk of the people leading the sport are men. So, we have to find ways to change that. But I see far too many female athletes who don't have a profile. And we also should not get caught up in thinking that profile is built on the back pages. Profile for female athletes should be built around a female audience. So it should be women's magazines, women's talk shows, etc., etc. We should be looking at it in that way. So I've spoken out about this actually quite a lot just recently, but I think if we had more female agents, more female business women helping our female athletes to understand the life and business side of that, it's not just the running or jumping or hitting or kicking a ball. This is, how do you grow yourself for the long term? How do you make yourself a strong personality that can survive beyond your sporting days? Because when your sporting career is over, what are you going to do then? So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Just more women around, experienced women around in general. And if we all, as experienced women, put our arm around one other person, whether you're a coach in a club and you bring in another club member to help you, we all have an experience that is valuable to somebody else, whatever it is we do. So I'm a big believer in bringing women together and women empowering women. And the program that I built with the LTA called She Rallies is all about a female army. And I trained up, I think we have 52 ambassadors now, and they work within their own backyards, and we help them to grow themselves and to grow their businesses. And we encourage them to train other women to deliver alongside them, and they grow their own localized army. Because the easiest way to get good at something is to work alongside somebody who's already great at what they do, at whatever level. And we need role models at every step of the game, whatever our game is. So yeah, I'm very passionate about that, and you do often feel like you're banging your head off a brick wall, but we have to be prepared for people saying no to us and holding up the hand and this kind of thing, and we have to keep going back. We have to develop a thick skin.
And you talk about developing a thick skin, something I think you and Andy obviously had to deal with, particularly as the Murray family was, like I said earlier on, thrust into the spotlight, thrust onto the back pages. There was obviously this misconception driven by the media, particularly early on in Andy's career, that he was maybe a bit sarcastic, slightly rude sometimes in press conferences. But actually, behind that was a nervous individual that had just made a name for himself on the tennis scene. What is it with the British media, do you think, that feels the need when there's a new star on the scene, and they feel that the need to sort of just pull them back down? That's something tough, and as a family, you've had to really go through, because you were sort of blown up as this pushy mum almost to begin with. But there's so much you were doing as a coach behind the scene, and so much Andy does off the court, and it's testament to the character he is in particular as well. How well thought of he is on the tennis circuit. But that is something you, as a family, have certainly had to deal with a lot.
Yeah, I think it's probably the hardest thing that we all had to learn to deal with. It's part and parcel of the life of being in the public eye, and it really went as probably started after Andy won the US Open Juniors in 2004, and we came back from America through the doors at Edinburgh Airport to. There was lots of flashing going on. You could see them through the frosted doors, and we thought there must have been an accident. And then we realised that actually it was photographers snapping away, waiting for us all to, well, Andy in particular, to come through these doors. And I remember thinking, what? Oh God, they're there for you, Andy. And I went, what on earth? It's like a junior tournament. What is it? But it was the excitement of, kind of Scottish kid wins junior Grand Slam, like unheard of. It's another reason why it's so disappointing to me that nobody would support me from that point when I was trying to get more support to support all the players, that there was this massive interest even from way back then within our country. But that was, my mum and dad were there to pick us up at the airport, and they said, you might not want to go home just yet because there's photographers all over your driveway and garden. And I was absolutely shocked, like, how did they know where we lived? How did this? Because of course, coming back from America, if he'd won it on the Sunday, we had to stay an extra day on the Monday for him to do all his media obligations that we knew nothing about. We were due to fly back on the Sunday night, and I had to learn all about taking him to Reuters and Bloomberg. We had to follow this like schedule and just jump in yellow cabs and go here, go there, and fulfill all of these obligations. And then we flew back on the Monday night, so we didn't get back till the Tuesday. So of course the media had time to find out where we lived and camp out, when we're coming back, what flights are coming into Edinburgh, all this sort of stuff. It was a real eye-opener, and really that was the moment from which our lives changed, I would say. And it definitely came to even probably biggest height, really, of awareness of this is what life is going to be like at Wimbledon in 2005, when Andy just turned 18, ranked about 350 in the world, in on a wild card, wins 2 rounds. Third round, he's middle Saturday. He's playing on the centre court against the world number 4. David Nalbandian, and James Bond, Sean Connery, is in the royal box, and I'm just sitting there on the player box in centre court for the first time thinking, I can't believe this. James Bond is watching my son playing tennis on the centre court at Wimbledon. Anyway, it was brand new. If you think about tennis and Wimbledon in particular, it's on the BBC, so there's no ad breaks. There's the cameras and the commentators need somewhere to go when there's a break in play, and there's 20, 25 seconds between points, there's 90 seconds at changeovers, there's a run up to matches. Of course they go in the player box, and of course they find you, and you're brand new, so they start talking about you, and they form opinions based on what you're doing, what you're wearing. They've never met you, they don't know much, and that was the start of it, really. And I'm very competitive, as you probably all know, and I've been there right from the start of it. Usually when nobody else is watching my kids, I would be the one that would be there. And of course you're encouraging always. So I like to pump my fist, and I like to shout. And you can do that when there's a crowd, because people don't hear you so much when you do that. If I'm sitting on my own watching the boys playing, I'm not shouting my head off like that. But I would shout, come on, let's go, or, something encouraging. But yeah, I think Andy was being picked apart for, why hasn't he shaved? He's got bum fluff. His hair's too big. His shorts are too big. He swears on court. He's grumpy. Why doesn't he smile? I'm like, he's 18. He's playing out there for the first time. He's a serious competitor. This is a massive opportunity for him. Of course, he's not going around laughing and smiling and joking, and neither are we in the player box, because although we are loving the experience of being there, this is our kind of our life. And so people see you in stressful situations and they make judgments on you that, and we always have to just keep reminding ourselves that these people who write these things or say these things, they're not people you've ever met. They're just forming an opinion from what they see. It does make you think about what people pick up from you, because I can understand why people would think I was competitive or pushy or overbearing if all the pictures that they saw of me were me going, "Ah," which was the only pictures that the media put out, because that's unusual to have a mum of sons going nuts in the player box. But if I was a dad or something, nobody would have batted an eyelid. So the female thing came into play there as well. But I think, over the years, I mean, Andy's 33 now, it is a very difficult thing to learn, and you don't learn it overnight, how to handle the media, how to project yourself. So it goes back to this whole profile thing that I was talking about with female athletes. You need to be prepared for that. We were suddenly all thrust into the spotlight with no preparation, no training, nobody to help us. And you kind of sink or swim. Of course, you make mistakes, you get things wrong. But we started to watch a lot of press conferences um, of other players doing them. We'd watch them on TV, I would tape them. You could see the players who handle it really well, and they're nearly always more experienced, older players. They've been through it, they've made their mistakes, they find their way to project themselves, their image or their persona that they want to project. So, watching people like Andy Roddick, who was very good, very funny, but sarcastic sometimes, but older, but fun to watch. Goran, always funny. Roger does his press conferences in 5 languages. I mean, Andy's never going to be able to do that, but really impressive, really smooth. Anyway, you have to learn from others, but you have to find your own way. So you need to experiment with things, and he's really good now at using his voice. Andy is. Jamie is also. Jamie hasn't had the same exposure as Andy, but he uses his voice. They both give back to the sport. They're humble. They share the amount of time that they give to younger players, British players coming through on their training camps and so forth. There's lots of things that they do that probably people don't know about, but they really give back to the sport, and they've remained grounded, which I'm just as proud of as all the achievements that they've made, that they've managed to stay normal against the backdrop of the world in which they inhabit for most of their working lives.
And it's testament to their character, actually, that you perhaps don't see so much of what they do behind the scenes and what they do give back, because it's not necessarily an ego trip for them. They're not trying to show the world that they're doing these things. They're just happy to do that. They live quite private lives on the whole, and they want to keep it that way, but still do their bit for local communities and to help your foundation as well. But the last probably couple of years have been very tough for you as a family as well, with Andy going through his injury in particular. I watched the Resurfacing documentary, which was fascinating, but you really got to see his personality throughout that and his relationship with his coaches and players on the tour as well. How tough a period was that for you as a family?
Yeah, it was. I mean, injury is part and parcel of any athlete's life. This one was just particularly tough and particularly long. I think probably one of the most difficult things was actually trying to find the right solution to the injury. And, it's another thing where if more athletes shared their case studies of injury diagnosis, rehab, back into training, etc., etc., then if another athlete has the same injury and that's available to you to go, okay, this athlete who does the same sport as you or similar sport, this is what happened, here are the similarities between what you did, here's how they managed it, and they're back on the tour or they're back on the pitch or whatever it is. But you don't find things like that. So you're often having to go and get an opinion, a second opinion, sometimes a third opinion, sometimes even more than that if you don't like what you've heard. And it's very difficult to know whose opinion to go with, who to trust, because this is your body, and if your body doesn't work, you don't work. It's your life, it's your working life. So I think that's been one of the hardest things, and one of Andy's motivations for doing the documentary was to show everything that you go through to try to rehab a long-term injury like that. And it's not just what you go through physically; it's what you go through emotionally, and what everybody around you goes through, and how important your support team around you is, friends, family, all the people who work with you. That came out very clearly in the documentary. But also just his commitment, his determination to get back, to do everything that he possibly could to get himself back on the court. So it was inspiring to people. I hope it let people see behind the scenes to. It's not what you see in terms of the performance on the centre court at Wimbledon. There's you don't see what goes into getting to that performance. All the years, days, months, weeks, all the people, the dedication, the pain, the suffering. So yeah, and I think he also hoped that it might encourage others to not necessarily make a documentary, but certainly to document um, their injuries in order to be able to share with others.
And Andy early on perhaps was a little bit shy when it comes to television. Do you think he secretly enjoys getting involved in that kind of thing now?
I think that not really. I think that you said already he is a private person. He doesn't go out looking for him. It's all about the tennis, the rewards that come from tennis in terms of the trophies. That's the thing for him. His love of the game, and that a lot of that linked to his character is what's got him through these last few years. This love of what he does. But no, I mean he's not gagging to be on TV on anything other than something that promotes his sport. He does it very infrequently, which you'll know. I think he's really good at it because he's got a really funny sense of humour. He's got a really dry sense of humour, and he's quick as well, annoyingly quick. And when he does do them, I think he comes across really well on them, but he doesn't do them very often. But I think the documentary, to have somebody following you around for the best part of 18 months, the lady who did it, I was going to say girl because to me she's young compared to me, and she's 27 or so now, but she was at the time the girlfriend of his brother-in-law, and she's now the wife of his brother-in-law. She is now his sister-in-law. So really, that had a lot to do with him being able to open up and have somebody follow around in a very, to really share so much, because it was somebody that he absolutely trusted. It was somebody who was pretty much part of the family, and that had a big thing to do with it. I think if it had been a team of random TV production team, I'm not sure he would have been persuaded to do something as deep as that. That's just my opinion.
Just finally, before you go, because I'm conscious you've got to get away, can you just describe what those last few moments, I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but those final few moments when Andy is on the cusp of winning the Wimbledon Championship, can you describe how those moments were for you leading up to those celebrations?
Yeah, I really don't remember very much about the whole match, but I do remember that last game. Probably because it's the game that I've seen the most on kind of repeat reels and so forth. But I think that for me, having watched Andy losing in the final in Wimbledon in 2012 against Federer, and seen, of course, at first hand how devastated he was. I mean, the world could see how devastated he was because, of course, he had to do a runner-up speech and he has to stand there in front of everybody when you're just such a hard thing to do. You're so exposed out there in an individual sport. If you're in a team sport, you can hide amongst your team. But he was so devastated after that defeat. And luckily in 2012, the Olympics came along kind of right after Wimbledon, and he had to get back in the saddle quickly, and he managed to win the Olympics, and he beat Federer in the final a few weeks later. But going into the 2013 final, because of what had happened the previous year, and knowing how much it meant to him to win at Wimbledon, and how much pressure there had been on him for so many years as the main British hope for a title at Wimbledon in 70 odd years, the pressure on him and the expectation on him was massive. And after 2012, when he lost, he felt like he'd let everybody down. He'd got that close, and you never know if you're going to get to a final again. Was that my chance? And I didn't get it. So for me, I really didn't enjoy that final at all. And I think I was just kind of quite glazed, as I usually am, just totally focused on him on the court. Don't talk to anybody. Nobody talks to me. I sit on an end. Don't want anybody. I don't want to hear anybody's comments or anything like that. And I'm a nightmare to sit beside it. But I'm fine being a nightmare, because actually, if he looks up and he wants eye contact, I will always be looking at him, and he wouldn't do it as much then. But when he was young, and Jamie the same, and you're the only person that's there and they need a bit of support, they always find you. So that's just the way that it's always been. So maybe that helps people to understand a little bit why I'm very like this. You won't never catch me speaking to somebody during a match, never. Because I remember when he was small, if somebody did come and speak to me when I was watching and something was going wrong, and he would go, "Mom, watch!" So yeah, but in that last game, he was 2 sets up, and then of course it was 40-love, and he was serving, and I know that I was sitting talking to myself and just going, one more serve, whack it, and then suddenly it was juice, and then it was a net cord, and it was advantage to Novak, and I was going, oh my God, don't let this happen again, and I was, I could hear my heart going. I was absolute torture. And then it was juice, and then when he won in the end, for me it was just complete and utter relief. Looking back, I would love to have enjoyed those finals more, but when you're so emotionally caught up in it, it's very, very, very difficult, very, very difficult. So I enjoyed 2016 a little bit more, because I think he was playing Raonic, and I felt like he should win that one. I felt like he had everything. He had everything he needed to win that one. Whereas with Djokovic, you just don't know. He'll go down as one of the greatest players of all time. But same thing. Don't take your eyes off it. It's never over till the last point is won. So yeah, it's torture. Mixture of severe nausea and a heart attack all going on at the same time for usually about 3 or 4 hours, because it's best of 5 sets. So anybody watching, feel for your parents when they watch you doing whatever sport it is, because they're probably experiencing the same kind of thing.
And just finally, do you think he's got one more Wimbledon win in him?
I'm not commenting on anything like that, because it ends up being a headline that I don't want, and all I'm going to say is that he will do everything that he possibly can to get himself back on the tour. And you all know what he's like. He's a born competitor. He's a fighter. He never gives up. So I would just like to see him back on the court again, whenever that might be. And the lockdown and the coming back from injury has not made that not made that any easier at the moment. But yeah, fingers crossed it won't be too long now.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Judy. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you for everything you're doing for national sport and females in sport as well. It's been really inspiring to be able to listen to you. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Clubhouse with Judy Murray. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it, and we'll see you very soon for more episodes.